A cosplay enthusiast who blurred the lines between fiction and reality, Bryan Patrick Miller, known as the Zombie Hunter, took his role-playing too far, indulging in his character's dark fantasies, with his seemingly harmless hobby concealing a chilling truth. Miller was a real-life slayer who brutally decapitated his victims. The community was horrified to learn that behind the mask of their favorite cosplay celebrity lay a cold-blooded killer responsible for the gruesome slayings of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas in the early 1990s. Detective Clark Schwarzkopf, upon reopening these cold cases, was shocked to find the perpetrator was not a monstrous figure, but a struggling single father who appeared mild-mannered and loving towards his daughter. This man couldn't be their suspect, right? Bryan Patrick Miller, also known as the Zombie Hunter, gained notoriety for his elaborate steampunk costume, combining Victorian elegance with Wild West and futuristic elements. He often appeared at comic conventions and other events wearing goggles, carrying a fake Gatling gun, while driving a modified police car decorated with fake blood. His ensemble was theatrical and well-known in the sci-fi and horror fandom community. Bryan seemed like a normal person to everyone. Despite the fact that he had spent a lot in that old police car of his, he appeared to be a normal, albeit reticent man. He liked dressing up as a zombie hunter, attending comic conventions, and relishing in the spotlight. He kept a cool head and rarely drank. Bryan, 42, became so well known that his zombie hunter gun was featured in a steampunk exhibition called as Steampunk, the Exquisite Adventurer, at the Sky Harbor International Airport. Bryan's obsession with cars was beyond limits. As a Ford fanatic, he totally modified his Crown Victoria police vehicle. Its exterior was adorned with neon lights, which complemented its tremendous engine power. What might have been the show stealer, however, was the life-sized zombie mannequin sitting in the rear. It gave a spooky yet almost intriguing touch to the car. It enabled Bryan to interact with others. Therefore, it opened to him a door for a social life. So while working as a packer at the Amazon.com warehouse in Phoenix, he dedicated a significant portion of his limited resources to it. Despite having a large number of online fans, Bryan felt lonely. What kind of issues was Bryan trying to get away from by shooting at fictional zombies? A father without a job who hoards things, or perhaps something darker. He had rented his house from a Mennonite church member. At first, the church provided him with comfort, but shortly after he left. Maybe he wasn't really a religious man. For a short time, he regularly attended the church, but eventually the congregants were only met with his daughter on Sundays. Chris King, the senior pastor of the church, invited him over for supper. King's wife commented that he seemed weird, which is something people normally notice when they meet cosplay enthusiasts. Bryan's social media presence frequently features images or art depicting women with disfigured bodies. His DeviantArt page, under the username TheDuck13, reveals that he was drawn to paintings portraying women as naked, tortured, traumatized, and physically suffering. Nevertheless, his tragic past was unknown to most people, and understanding it requires going back decades. May 1989, when 24-year-old Celeste Bentley had just stepped off at the same bus stop as a 16-year-old boy. As she set off toward her workplace, she sensed the boy dash past her. She felt as if he tried to pinch her as a harmless prank. However, when she reached behind to touch her back, her hand returned, smeared with blood. Bryan had stabbed her. Celeste shouted and made her way to the store where she used to work. Within 30 minutes, Celeste was in an ambulance after a coworker alerted 911. The cops located the boy and took him to the ambulance for identification. That boy's name was Bryan Patrick Miller. Celeste filed charges. The boy just barely avoided severing her spine, rupturing her lungs, or even piercing through her heart. He was sent to a juvenile correctional facility for aggravated assault. There he served a 2-year sentence. Prior to it, he lived in Hawaii with his mother. She worked as a detention officer for the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Following his father's recent serious motorcycle accident, he stayed with his mother before accompanying her to Phoenix. When Bryan was in the juvenile facility, his mother, Ellen Miller, noticed something unsettling. While sorting his stuff, she stumbled upon a note labeled as "The Plan." The pages detailed a dreadful objective: abduct a female, tie her up in the trunk, undress her, and force her against her will. This memo outlined how he planned to find and capture a young woman. Bryan's mother became so concerned that she reported it to Phoenix police. It was 1991. Bryan had just turned 18 and was freed from the detention. She informed the cops at the time that she was extremely concerned about her safety and could not allow him to come back home. So after being released, Bryan moved to a Phoenix halfway home. It was merely the beginning. On November 8, 1992, a horrific incident took place. Angela Brosso, a tech worker who had just moved to Phoenix, was enjoying the nice weather by getting herself in shape. Angela made it a habit to go for an evening bicycle ride around the golden hour at sunset, which is thought of as the best time for biking in Phoenix. It allowed her to take a little break from her desk work and stretch her legs. She also had her best ideas during this period. As dusk approached, she followed her usual path. Joe, Angela's boyfriend, recalled that she had left her flat at around 7 o'clock that evening. He remained at home, planning to bake Angela a birthday cake, expecting her to be back soon. It was only a few hours until her 22nd birthday. It was her birthday eve. He wanted to do something special for her. However, as the hours went by without any response from Angela, Joe got increasingly concerned because her absence was unusual. He desperately started looking through the canal trails, contacting Angela's acquaintances, even reaching out to her mother who lived in Pennsylvania. Ultimately, he informed the police of Angela's absence. She, just like most of the Phoenix residents, liked to ride along the routes that ran beside the city's distinctive canals. However, danger may be laying close, particularly near one of the tunnel networks beneath the freeway. The next morning, searchers came across a terrible find. Her decapitated torso was found next to the trail she was alleged to be riding her bike on, with deadly stab wounds. It was in the field near her flat. About 10 days later, a man fishing in the canal spotted something strange. It was a human head caught in a grate. Though it had been over a week ago since, the head still seemed to be in good condition, suggesting that it was well preserved. The officers came to the conclusion that this wasn't some accident, assault, or robbery gone south. It was a premeditated killing in order to secure the trophy. It was even more unsettling than they had initially anticipated. Given the absence of decomposition, authorities speculated that the perpetrator had kept her dismembered head in a refrigerator before discarding it into the canal. Her purple mountain bike, which she would ride through the city, was lost and never seen again. A year passed without any advancement in the case. There weren't any leads or witnesses, only those who recovered the severed remains. Detectives were perplexed. 10 months after Angela's death, Melanie Burness's mother arrived home from a dinner date to find that her daughter had breached her curfew and hadn't been back yet. On that fateful night, in a peaceful community located far away from the busy streets of Phoenix, a mother's suffering unfolded. She had just gotten home from a dinner date, eager to tell her 17-year-old daughter, Melanie Burness, all about her outing. As she came through the door, she noted that Melanie's bicycle was missing from its usual spot. Anxiety flooded through her as she came to know that her daughter wasn't just late, but also disappeared. With every passing minute, the mother's concern grew. Where might Melanie be? Did something happen to her? Different thoughts raced through her head. It was the middle of the night, and she was consumed by its silence. Around 10:30 p.m., Melanie's best friend, Rachel Sheppermaker, was finishing up for bedtime when she received a call from Melanie's mother. "Is Melanie with you?" She was terrified. This wasn't Melanie at all. Yeah, she would go out, break some rules, but never had she been out for so late. She would always be back on time. Rachel didn't worry much of it, thinking a friend forgot to pick her mother's call. She was definitely going to be in trouble. Melanie, however, was located the following morning. Charlotte Pottle was riding her bicycle along the canal with her little daughter buckled into its seat. As the bicycle was passing through one of the tunnels, something splattered upon Charlotte. It was a muddy puddle, yet something about it seemed weird. Something wasn't right with that splash, but Charlotte couldn't precisely say what. She ended up turning her bicycle around to find out. Attentively, she took a glance and observed that it wasn't muddy water, but blood. Charlotte Pottle had rendered a startling revelation that was going to rock a quiet community in Phoenix to its foundations. Charlotte spotted drag tracks headed towards a tree before curving back into the close-by canal. Following Charlotte's worrisome discovery, authorities were notified. Later that same evening, local news reports aired, describing the grisly discovery of a woman's decapitated body in the canal. A somber reminder of Angela Brosso's untimely demise, whose head was previously found nearby. Rachel Sheppermaker was taken aback when she heard of the news. The body was discovered in a teal bodysuit, which Melanie had never seen before. Melanie didn't have a teal bodysuit, she stated to everyone who paid attention. It wasn't something she might wear. However, Rachel's denial mounted to dread the next day upon receiving confirmation. The body was, in fact, of Melanie's. The community mourned the girl's ordeal, while the authorities had launched an investigation to bring her justice. One of Bryan's friend and roommate remembers him making jokes about that night, particularly because he had a bodysuit that resembled Melanie's. Melanie was thought by the detectives to be a victim of the same person who took Angela's life. They aligned evidence that indicated the perpetrator followed a calculated strategy, possibly ambushing both women from behind. Further investigation revealed heartbreaking information about Melanie's last minutes. The perpetrator not only stabbed her, but also assaulted her. This finding offered a significant turning point, DNA evidence that may eventually result in the apprehension of the assailant. As officials conducted their investigation, the locals stayed unified by grief and optimism. The despairing incidents of Angela and Melanie traumatized the entire community. Young women were terrified to ride alone near the canal. Bryan Miller tried to take a fresh start. In 1997, he got married to Amy Miller. They seemed like a lovely couple, both with cute round faces, wearing glasses. They were like the type of neighbors you'd want to raise your children next to. However, they did harbor certain weird fetishes that they kept to themselves. In the words of Amy, they were sort of into masochism. To them, romance entailed some bleeding, some cutting, and lots of role-playing foreplay. As horrific as it sounds, Bryan would insert needles into Amy's lip, even both lips at times, and stitch them shut. It was all consensual, although a bit out of control. He would make cuts on her body, even licking the blood. The couple also had a daughter. They spent 7 years together, and then Amy filed for separation. Both went their separate ways in 2005. In 2006, at the divorce's finalization, he received the legal custody of his daughter. The precision and fatal nature of the original stab wounds in both Angela Brosso and Melanie Burness's cases led the authorities to believe that the attacker had surgical expertise. The cold case instilled anxiety in the Phoenix neighborhood for years, making parents unwilling to allow their kids staying out after dark. The Canal Slayer cases remained unsolved for more than 20 years, even though consistent male DNA was recovered from both of the crime scenes. However, advances in forensic technology, such as DNA testing and genetic genealogy, have reignited the spark in the investigation. In 2014, forensic geneticist Colleen Fitzpatrick employed the DNA profiles from crime scenes to look through public genealogical databases for possible matches. She checked for a potential match using the Y chromosome in the DNA. Her search found 6 hits for the name Miller, encouraging investigators to look more deeply. Miller, on the other hand, is a rather common last name. So investigator Schwarzkopf dug deeper into his archives, finding 6 people with the surname Miller. Looking through his files, as Schwarzkopf came across the note, Bryan's mother wrote to the authorities, he realized something. Many of the events described there were identical to what happened with Angela. Subsequently, he narrowed his focus to Bryan Patrick Miller, a 42-year-old Phoenix resident, despite being one of nearly 600 persons of interest. Records suggest that Bryan's case was not extensively looked into by the authorities. After more investigation, it turned out that he had a criminal past prior to the Canal killings. Records mentioned his Phoenix address and age, but his identity remained a mystery, lurking amidst hundreds of other suspects within the case files. So they honed in on the 42-year-old single dad. Officer Eric Braverman pondered over Bryan Patrick Miller's dual personality, contrasting his friendly attitude with his infamous repute as the zombie hunter. Despite his imposing alternate ego, Bryan, in actuality, seemed like an ordinary divorced single father. He had photographs of him alongside policemen while dressed up in his costume. He was somewhat of a celebrity. However, questions remained about his possible involvement in the Canal killings. To corroborate or reject the claims, investigators devised a surveillance plan that involved carefully observing his actions at his workplace in an Amazon warehouse. Every day, Bryan would park his unique zombie car at the same place, drawing attention by playing loud music through the breaks. Even at the lunch break, for 15 minutes, he continued to do the same thing. Detective Clark Schwarzkopf crafted an elaborate plan to obtain Bryan Miller's DNA. He reached out the single dad pretending to be a security consultant, offering him a job that fitted his demands with more money. Bryan, drawn by the lure of a high-paying job, agreed to sit with Schwarzkopf at a Chili's restaurant to hear more. Schwarzkopf and Miller filled out a job application upon their meeting on January 2, 2015, which provided the cold case team with an ideal opportunity to acquire the sample of his DNA. However, he took the offers by surprise, bringing over his adolescent daughter. Bryan's compassionate personality was visible throughout their conversation, especially through how he spoke with his 15-year-old daughter, Sarah, who was accompanying him. The stage had been set for a crucial point in the investigation. During the meeting, Schwarzkopf and Bryan proceeded with supposedly mundane stuff, oblivious of the high stakes involved and crucial role this interaction would play in solving the Phoenix Canals case. The whole team was ready. They were watching cautiously as the staff gently took out the cutlery from the dishwasher and laid it in the booth where Bryan would later come. He ordered a cheeseburger, which they finished quickly. The investigator kept trying to get Bryan to drink a soda or water, but he was way too hungry. The sting operation appeared to be a complete failure until finally, Bryan had a sip of the water. Even with Bryan's troublesome past as a juvenile felon under his belt, Detective Clark Schwarzkopf could not get rid of the feeling that he may not be the person they were looking for. The way Bryan Miller engaged with his daughter validated Schwarzkopf's intuition that he didn't match the description of a cold-blooded killer from the early 1990s. As their meetup came to an end, Schwarzkopf was given a quick peek of Bryan's zombie hunter car before saying goodbyes, while assuring to be in touch. What Bryan had no clue about was that his water glass was subtly being examined by the crime lab on behalf of the cold case unit. Roughly 2 weeks later, Schwarzkopf, along with his team, got a surprising call from the lab, eliciting a mixture of excitement and disbelief among the investigators. At first taken as a joke, their skepticism rapidly evolved to shock when the lab director verified that Bryan Miller's DNA from the water glass, upon comparison with that recovered from Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness's crime scenes, gave a positive match. The finding sent a shiver of astonishment through Schwarzkopf, who could not entirely believe what he was witnessing. In a matter of hours, Miller was arrested. Following up with the police interrogations, he vehemently denied any involvement in the crime, maintaining a contemptuous and perplexed demeanor.
How can you explain to me that your DNA is there?
I can't. I can't remember everything I did back then, but I know I didn't kill anyone. I've never killed anyone. When I was a teenager, I stabbed that woman.
Right.
That haunted me for years.
Even though Bryan insisted he was innocent, detectives acted quickly and secured a search warrant for his home. Seeking additional evidence, they were prepared to look into every bit of his life and belongings. Detective Clark Schwarzkopf recalled the moment clearly, describing the peculiar scenario as he came closer to Bryan Miller's house. They were met with skeptical views from bystanders who questioned their abilities to make it into the messy residence. The house looked like a set from the TV show Hoarders, with junk jammed into every available space. Trash has left just small pathways that lead to crucial rooms, such as the bathroom and kitchen. Schwarzkopf felt overwhelmed as he surveyed through the chaotic situation. He realized the tremendous challenge ahead as his team set out to cautiously look through all the mess to find any conclusive evidence. Amidst the chaos, Schwarzkopf centered on a fresh lead that Miller had brought up during his questioning: Amy, his ex-wife. Miller had pointed out at Amy as the only person he harbored genuine hate against, implying an unpleasant history between the two. Schwarzkopf delved into Amy's statement and found more shocking details regarding Miller's past. In 1996, she met Bryan Miller for the first time, and back then she was only 19 years old. After that, in less than a year, they tied the knot and relocated to Everett, Washington. Amy made a startling admission to the detective. She informed him that Miller had confessed to an atrocious act of violence: the slaying of a young girl who came upon his door years ago, an incident that had been under the radar until now. Schwarzkopf continued his investigation after learning about Miller's disturbing past. He was resolved to put an end to the long-standing mystery revolving around the Canal Killer. Despite the case's intricacies and impact on mental health, Schwarzkopf stayed determined to find the answers. He was driven by an insatiable desire to ensure that justice is served. Thanks to Amy, detectives were provided with this crucial information. Bryan had confessed to her of a stabbing incident involving a mentally disabled Girl Scout who approached his doorstep. Bryan stated that the incident occurred shortly after he was freed from the juvenile facility. He was staying in an apartment provided by a Mennonite church outreach program north of central Phoenix. Based on his account, upon hearing the innocent girl knock on the door, Bryan forced her into the apartment and then sliced open her throat before she even could make any noise. He reportedly wanted to keep her head, placing it in cold water, which added to the harrowing details. As he put it in the tub, he mistakenly poured hot water, ruining his plans. Then he severed her body and tossed into the trash. Indeed, a whole individual stuffed into trash bags. He kept the bags in the trash can until garbage day. However, he explained the foul smell that his neighbors were complaining about by claiming that it was just meat gone expired. The story did have a resemblance to a report from May 26, 1992. Within the city of North Phoenix, a 13-year-old girl named Brandy Myers was wandering around. Equipped with a strong sense of purpose and a stack of pledge forms, she embarked on a neighborhood survey. She was going door to door gathering funds for the bookathon held at the school. Her actual age was 13, but mentally she was like a 9-year-old. Brandy was last sighted by witnesses within 70 feet from Bryan's residence. Mennonites remembered the awful stench that was coming from his apartment. It was worse than rotten meat. so awful that they had to have the house cleaned in the absence of Bryan when he was gone somewhere. However, they didn't look inside the trash bags. They simply cleaned the entire place. It had been a happy marriage for Amy and Bryan. Then what caused the shift? In 2002, a woman named Melissa Ruiz Ramirez was strolling down the street in Everett at night. A man stopped by and offered her a ride. She had seen that man speaking with a friend of hers before, so she assumed he was fine. She said to him that she needed to make a call. Back then, most people didn't have cell phones, so the man brought her to his workplace so she could make the call. While she was on the phone, the man abruptly charged at her with a 12-inch sharpened kitchen knife and stabbed her in the back. The girl fought back and eventually managed to flee. When police arrived, the man asserted it was self-defense, but the officers weren't sure of who to trust. Bryan Miller was that man in question. He was taken into custody and accused with first-degree assault using a lethal weapon. He was incarcerated from May 2002 until his December trial. He was released, but Amy sensed a disturbing shift in her husband's behavior. She claimed it started with a letter Bryan wrote to her from prison while he was awaiting trial. It started with his assertions of innocence and progressed to intimate deviance. Once he was released from jail, he would bring needles, knives, and pain into romance. It was unbearably dark. The trial of Bryan Patrick Miller, infamously known as the Zombie Hunter, began with surprising admissions about his past and a novel defense tactic. Bryan was charged with the 1992 killings of Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas. He's not facing charges for the killing of Brandy Myers, since they didn't have much evidence on that. His defense attorneys admitted that he was the canal killer, but contended he was not guilty due to mental illness. She implied that his mother's mistreatment during his formative years contributed to his violent conduct. They said Miller suffered from dissociative amnesia, which prevented him from recalling the crimes. Prosecutors responded by providing evidence of Miller's history of violence, which even included an earlier stabbing incident. Bryan's ex-wife provided testimony during the trial regarding his escalating aggressive behavior, encompassing instances of abuse and intimate deviance. The trial ended in June 2023, with Bryan being found guilty in both cases by the judge. Taking the trauma he experienced as a child into account, the judge still sentenced him to life imprisonment. In 2023, a 48-hour producer approached him via email. Miller maintained his innocence. He argued with psychological specialists summoned by his defense attorneys, who claimed he has dissociative amnesia and cannot recall anything about the crimes. Miller's main regret regarding his imprisonment is not being able to see his daughter. He remarked that what he misses the most is spending time with his daughter and friends. If you find this video compelling, show your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. By doing so, you'll stay updated about the latest investigations and mysteries. Your support means the world to us as we continue to pursue the truth in the world of cold cases.